These are the best phones you can currently buy: the iPhone 17 Pro Max, Google Pixel 10 Pro XL and the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra. We've compared them in great detail, used each one as our daily driver for weeks and tested their performance, and were particularly precise in our camera comparison. Quite surprisingly, the Pixel beats the iPhone by a mile in two aspects. You should definitely watch this comparison to the end, because there are quite a few surprises. Let's start with internal hardware. The iPhone has an A19 Pro chip and the Samsung S25 Ultra has the Snapdragon 8 Elite for Galaxy. You can get the Pixel with the Tensor G5 processor, and all of them feature 256GB up to 1TB of storage, but only Apple also offers 2TB. Samsung and Apple use 12GB of RAM and Google uses 16. In real life, all three feel very powerful and always snappy. No matter what you're throwing at it, you hardly ever have to wait for anything. However, there are clear differences in benchmarks and during gaming. In Geekbench 6, the Pixel single-core performance isn't bad at all, but it lags far behind the competitors in all other aspects. In the multi-core test, the Samsung is marginally better than the Apple, but the iPhone beats all of them in the single-core and graphics test. Our 3D Mark comparison, which tests gaming performance, is also interesting. Here, the S25 Ultra is actually better than the iPhone, and the Pixel takes the last place again. Apple wins by a mile in our stress test. It achieves a stability of 69.6% here, while the Pixel comes in at 58.8% and the S25 Ultra at only 43.1%. So the Pro Max can maintain its performance consistently for a longer time, which speaks for excellent cooling. The other two have to throttle down faster or the chip would overheat. In reality, this means that you will be able to play on the iPhone for longer periods at the highest graphics settings. And video export is faster when editing videos simply because the chip doesn't have to throttle down as much. We are all Fortnite fans here in the studio and we tested the game on all three phones. Unfortunately, the Pixel mirrors its benchmark results and performs the weakest here. You can play Fortnite, but only at 60 FPS on epic settings, and you can't even select anything higher. On the S25 Ultra, you can select 120 FPS, and it actually runs surprisingly stable at over 100 FPS even during longer sessions. The graphics settings in Fortnite are not the same from platform to platform. On the iPhone 17 Pro Max, you can only choose 120 FPS as an option if you set the graphics to medium. That then runs very nicely with between 100 and 120 FPS and looks slightly better than on the Samsung, but really only slightly. However, if you set the settings to epic on the iPhone, you can only select 60 FPS, but the graphics look a bit better again than on the Samsung, and it runs pretty smoothly at 55 to 60 FPS. If you're looking for a gaming phone, the iPhone is clearly the winner. Games run very well with the highest graphics settings even over a longer period. In general, the iPhone is better if you need strong performance. It also renders videos much faster in LumaFusion and in Instagram edits, and is also more stable than a Snapdragon 8 Elite. But yes, if you prefer Android, the S25 is better than the Pixel in this regard. I was pretty surprised by my camera comparison. In JPEG or HEIC format, the S25 Ultra's 200 megapixel main camera has slightly more detail than the 17 Pro Max 48 megapixel camera. And even crazier, the Pixel 10 Pro XL with its 50 megapixels is sharper than both and wins by quite a bit. Even in RAW, the Pixel has more detail than the iPhone and S25 Ultra, truly impressive. However, the Google phone has the worst ultra wide-angle camera of the three. And here, the Samsung is marginally, but really only very marginally sharper than the iPhone. In RAW, however, the iPhone delivers better results. I suspect that's also because Apple edits and sharpens even RAW files slightly. The iPhone actually lives up to its reputation as a great camera phone with its telephoto camera. Although Google and Samsung offer a 5x zoom, the iPhone with its 4x zoom is slightly sharper. Plus, in reality, 4x is much more useful than 5x, especially when photographing portraits. A 4x camera is more useful than a 5x camera. Now, sharpness and detail aren't everything. For example, the iPhone takes the best photos in portrait mode. Samsung's can unfortunately only be at 12 megapixels, and the Pixel was the worst at cutting out the subject in our test. I also think Apple is generally often better at post-processing. I tested the Pixel camera more closely on a trip to Budapest simply because I was so impressed by the quality. And it really is. The long exposure feature is also great and really useful. Unfortunately, I also noticed that you can only take 3 50-megapixel RAW photos quickly after another in a row. After that, you have to pause for a few seconds, something buffers in the background. That's a real shame, and it's a big drawback for me. The other two don't have this problem. At night, the iPhone 17 Pro Max takes significantly better shots than the S25 Ultra, and the Pixel 10 Pro XL is sometimes on par with the iPhone and sometimes shows a little more detail. Let's move on to the front cameras. Here, the Pixel 10 Pro XL again has slightly more detail than the iPhone, even though its new 18-megapixel camera is higher resolution. And while the S25 also offers a lot of detail, it has significantly more noise in the shadows than the other two. The cool thing about the iPhone is, of course, that thanks to the new center stage camera, you can rotate photos and videos with the front camera both vertically and horizontally without having to turn the phone. Now, if the pure unedited photo quality is most important to you, the Pixel is the clear winner. I think it's generally great in this regard. However, when considering everything, I think the iPhone is a better choice for most if you want a great camera phone. Photos look great, and I find unedited photos mostly better than on Samsung's. If you don't want to bother much with photography, most people will be able to take consistently better photos with the iPhone. Now comes the big but. You can't manually control the iPhone camera, unfortunately. Even with third-party apps like Halide, you can set an exposure time of only 1 second at most, for example. If you want to take long exposures, you can only do that by combining many photos into one with an app. But you can take beautiful, manual long exposures with the Samsung and Google. So if you want to use your smartphone like a camera, I recommend the Pixel or S25 Ultra more. The Pixel also has a great long exposure mode that works during the day. By the way, you might have seen in the photo comparison that we zoom in at least 100% and often even 200 and 300%. You only see significant differences when doing so. So our criticism is at a very high level, and if you mainly post photos on social media and aren't a camera or photo nerd like me, all these differences are negligible. I find it pretty sad that the Pixel 10 Pro XL performs quite poorly in our video test. The picture looks good in itself, but there's a constant slight stutter. That's due to the image stabilization, which apparently isn't working properly. I also noticed that it over-sharpens a lot in 2x zoom, which makes the video almost unusable. Videos from the S25 Ultra look great, especially on a phone, but if you watch it on a large monitor, you can see artificial sharpening that isn't quite as nice. It's okay, but the iPhone looks more natural in comparison. The iPhone is by far the best choice for video recordings. There's a lot of detail in the video without overly aggressive sharpening, and you can even record in ProRes log if you want. There are clear differences in design between the three. The iPhone 17 Pro Max has an aluminum body with a ceramic shield back and front and looks like a phone for geeks, like for gamers, especially the orange version of course. The S25 Ultra has a titanium frame and Gorilla Glass on the front and back, and that one has more of an industrial look to me. Google, on the other hand, relies on an aluminum frame, also Gorilla Glass, and that looks more like a phone for designers, less for nerds. All of them are protected against water and dust according to IP68, and at 8.2mm, the Samsung is the thinnest, followed by the 8.5mm Pixel and the 8.8mm iPhone. All have a USB-C 3.2 port, and all can be connected to external monitors, but the iPhone lacks a desktop mode. You unlock the latter with Face ID, while Samsung and Google offer a fingerprint reader. However, the Pixel also has a secure facial recognition that you can use to unlock banking apps. You can't do that with the S25 Ultra. There are interesting differences regarding their displays. While the S25 Ultra and iPhone 17 Pro Max are exactly 6.9 inches, the Pixel is marginally smaller at 6.8 inches. All have a pixel density well over 450 ppi and thus look very sharp. And yes, all support up to 120Hz and all are OLEDs. With a peak brightness of 2600 nits, the S25 Ultra is darker than the Google and Apple, which both offer up to 3000 nits. However, the standard brightness, that is when you manually go to the maximum, is significantly brighter on the Pixel than the other two. And the Apple is then only marginally brighter than the Samsung. So if you want the brightest display in every situation, the Pixel is the clear winner. If you want to write on your smartphone with a stylus, the S25 Ultra is the only choice. The S Pen works very well, it's included, and Samsung Notes is a great note-taking app. You can only write on the other two with a capacitive stylus, and these are very bad by comparison. The speakers are excellent on all three and pretty much equally good. It's hardly possible to tell a difference. There are huge differences in the software, of course. The Pixel and Galaxy both run Android 16, with both brands having customized the interface. Both will get 7 years of updates. The iPhone was released with iOS 26 and will also get updates for a very long time, although Apple doesn't specify exactly how long, but certainly 7 years. Software-wise, there are some differences, although I don't think they are that big anymore. After all, the iPhone now has a Files app and you can connect external SSDs and so on. Many apps are the same anyway. Apple has a really great ecosystem, and if you always had an iPhone, a Mac and an iPad, it hardly makes sense to switch to an Android device. I don't think anyone will doubt that Google offers by far the best AI features. Samsung also has Gemini for sure, but Google's AI can make the camera app's 100x zoom usable. It's hardly a photo anymore, but partially AI generated, but quite impressive. And the live translation feature for phone calls works astonishingly well. In our battery test, the iPhone leads slightly with 26.5 hours, followed by the S25 Ultra's 26.25 hours. The Pixel performs the worst with 18.9 hours. For this test, we always let an HD YouTube video run on an endless loop at max brightness. And yes, our test isn't perfect because the Google phone is significantly brighter. In reality, the runtimes are quite similar when using them in the real world and at the same brightness. So, which of the three is the better phone? The iPhone 17 Pro Max is better if you need a lot of power for games and even want to edit videos with a phone. It's also great as a camera phone, particularly good for video recordings and for Apple fans anyway. The Pixel 10 Pro XL, on the other hand, is the better choice if you want the brightest possible display and the best AI in every situation. But it's also a great choice if you want to take particularly sharp and detailed photos and are willing to accept compromises elsewhere, especially with videos. You should grab the Samsung, however, if you need the S Pen and want to take good videos and good photos, so both. And especially if you want unedited RAW and manual camera controls, like for long exposures. It's also better than the Pixel if you want a gaming smartphone, but not an iPhone. All three devices are pretty expensive, yet you get very similar features with the non-Pro models for hundreds of dollars less. You should definitely check out our comparison of the iPhone 17 with the Pixel 10, because then you'll know whether it's really worth spending so much more money on a Pro phone.